Hey everybody, Rye Guy Ottawa here. One of my intellectual heroes, Nassim Haramein, had a podcast the other day. It was supposed to be about ancient mysteries, the pyramid phenomenon, things of that nature. And I was watching intently because I have a Facebook page, a community called Ancient Advanced Civilizations, and you can subscribe to that too, as well as this channel. Anyway, I was watching, and when he talked about the unlikelihood of one atom, so much as one atom coalescing in a random universe, let alone evolution and let alone, animals being perfect for their environment and stuff, got me thinking of my question of metaconsciousness. Is the universe alive? Is every amoeba got some form of consciousness? Isn't it true that evolution never makes a mistake and so there is, and he uses the example of a blind person ordering a Rubik's Cube. And he said, what if you could, even if they were blind, it would take them forever. But if they could hear you say yes or no to a move, they could do it in a reasonable amount of time. But that still implies a meta understanding, a bigger understanding of the greater picture to be able to say, yes, this is the right evolutionary step, or no, this is not. Anyway, I'm still confused, but Nassim, being the gentleman Montrealer that he is, devoted a good little bit chunk of time to the question because I think he recognizes that lots of people have it. So I'll let him speak for himself. But Rye Guy Ottawa, if you like what I'm getting at, hit subscribe.
And so, we do a calculation. Okay, so we've got this enzyme, this biomolecule that's involved in transcribing the information stored in the DNA. So this is an extremely central aspect. There's three pivotal things that make a living organism distinguishable from a purely physical system that you might call abiotic or prebiotic. One of those is the decoding of information, the storage of information, and the decoding of that information. So obviously, information is stored in the DNA. Well, there's an enzyme, a molecule, a protein that decodes that information into functional products or proteins. So you need that to have life. One of the problems is that that molecule has such extreme complexity that we calculated something like 10 to the 4,000 potential configurations, 4,000 and some change, potential configurations. So, this molecule is made up of subunits, and you can have one of actually about 100 different kind of subunits in each position. So you've got 10 to the 4,000 and change potential configurations of this molecule. So how does that evolve randomly?
Right. The probabilities is 10 to the 8,896, I believe. That are calculated in the paper, right?
Even higher.
Right. And so just so people understand what that number is, because people don't really necessarily understand exponents. Well, a good example would be a centimeter, right? A centimeter is very small, and the universe is really big, right? So there's billions of galaxies. Each galaxy has billions of stars. Most stars are much larger than our sun. Our sun looks like a grain of sand compared to most stars. And so the universe is really big. But the radius of the universe, the observable universe, which is, significantly large, is 10 to the 28 centimeters. So that's the radius of the observable universe. So 10 to the 8,896 in terms of probabilities, so it's 1 to 1 to 1 to 10 to the 8,896 is basically zero probability that molecule just happened because things are bumping into each other and randomly, and somehow this thing happened. And this is just one thing that's got to happen. You know, we're made of 100 trillion cells, and they duplicate. There's like 1,000 billion chemical change.
1,000 billion.
Yeah, sorry, 1,000 billion chemical change occurring every second for all this to happen. And these molecules are working hard, right?
Yeah. And so I think the term we use is so we're very subtle about it. We say this is hyper astronomically improbable. That this is going to emerge via a random stochastic process, an undirected or blind type process. Those are actually the kind of terms that are used in the consensus model, the predominant model, to explain this kind of hyper astronomical improbability. One of the papers, we may even cite it, I don't know, it says its title is Winning the Cosmic Jackpot, winning the cosmic lottery, because that is the scientific explanation.
Really bad.
That is the scientific explanation, is that, well, yeah, it's hyper astronomically improbable, but we just happen to win the cosmic lottery.
That's right. That's right. And then, and we keep winning it every second, like there is no tomorrow, because the probability that all that actually works out to 100 trillion cells, is very, very low. Like if we were to calculate those probabilities, then the number would even get more astronomical. And so in that paper, and this relates to our evolution, and it does relate to ancient civilization and consciousness relating to the information that's available in the universe, meaning the idea that evolution is a linear learning curve may not be correct, meaning that it can learn in certain ways. Yes, it evolves in certain ways, for instance, technologically, but it doesn't necessarily, mean that it has evolved in its capacity to interact or to understand fundamentally the relationship it has to the world, the universe as a whole, and themselves. And I was seeing in the comments people saying, but what about consciousness being primary? Like this is the thing you get a lot nowadays, especially from the spiritual community. And I always, it's correct. I mean, it's a good thought that actually there's an organizing principle. The problem with that statement is that if you say that consciousness is primordial and you don't describe what consciousnness is, you might as well have started a religion again, and call it God or call it whatever you want, call it goddess, whatever, and not explain what it is. And you still have dogma. You still have, you still don't understand the mechanics, because consciousness is undefined. What is that? Self-awareness. Okay, well, how does it happen? And so what we're saying, this is much more profound, and people need to understand that. And we're not saying that consciousness has nothing to do with it. We are placing consciousness at the center of creation, at the center of the universe, but we're not doing it just arbitrarily. We're actually saying, and we describe this in this paper, that consciousness is actually a feedback of information in the structure of space and in the network of space. And that, because particles are entangled, and that's, very much proven in laboratory that you can entangle particles. And now many theories are starting to show that particles are most likely entangled by wormholes and that these wormholes interact with black holes at the cosmological level, and that entangles the cosmological level with the quantum level. And if you're interested in this piece of information, look up ER equals EPR. But in any case, you can see that consciousness is actually a flow of information in the structure of spacetime, and that flow of information is responsible for the material world that you're made of, and that's what's and the biology that emerged from it, which that's the exciting part, William.
Yeah. So, I have difficulty with this particular area because I just cannot actually get my mind into that level of linear type thinking. They would say this before that. This kind of chicken or the egg type mindset. It's I don't know why you would put yourself into that box, which is oftentimes what you get from many individuals when we begin speaking about this. Obviously, you need both. Chicken or the egg. You need both of those. And you can't really have one without the other. Well, it's kind of the same with consciousness. Consciousness or matter or consciousness. Well, actually, you can't really have one without the other. You need both. Now, I know that the spiritual community and even what you experience spiritually would seem to be at odds with this, just because consciousness has transcendent characteristics. But those transcendent characteristics are actually one of the reasons why it's so integral to the formation of structure and order in the evolution and development of the universe from the beginning. That Genesis event that Nassim was describing, which what was the beginning of our universe, not the beginning of everything, because it's a multiverse. But consciousness also, though, I believe needs a stratum to work within. What would be just a purely unembodied consciousness? Yeah. So I believe that the solution is very much both and that's where the science. That's what the science suggests. That's
Exactly.
where. Yeah.
Exactly. The feedback structure, that occurs, is required for organization to occur. So for instance, in the Connected Universe movie, we give an example of a Rubik's Cube, and the probabilities of solving a Rubik's Cube. And if you give it to a blind person and ask them to order it blindly, the probabilities of you ordering the sixth face of a Rubik's Cube by random chances are in the quintillions. And if it takes a second each move, you exceed the time since the beginning of the universe by billions and billions of years just to order a Rubik's Cube, which is much simpler than all the biological complexity we see. And so, but if you tell the blind person yes or no every time they make a move, you give them just one bit of feedback, within 2.5 minutes, the Rubik's Cube is going to be ordered. So feedback is the key there, and this is where consciousness comes in, and because consciousness is feedback. Consciousness is self-awareness, is feedback. It's like you seeing yourself in a mirror and saying, that is me. I understand this is me, and I understand I'm in this world and I'm exploring this world, right? The exploration of this world comes from feedback. You're receiving signals, electromagnetic signals that are going in your eyes, electric signals that are coming from your fingers, electric signals coming from your nose, and all this, and this is giving you information that you're feeding to yourself. Now, I was seeing in the chat as well people asking, what does wormhole have to do with this and all this? Well, the physics we wrote to describe the mass and radius of a proton, which is very precise, but as well has been confirmed in experimental studies. That is, I made a prediction using this theory, and that prediction was confirmed in accelerators in Switzerland that measured the radius of the proton more precisely than any other measurements before. And that precise measurement, was correct. The prediction was correct, and is inside 1 sigma of the experiment. That means it's inside the margin of error of the experiment. That means that the theoretical prediction may be more precise even than the experiment, but the experiment is slowly getting to it. And just as a parenthesis, in some 30 years or 3 decades of string theory, and thousands and thousands and thousands of physicists and billions of dollars spent into string theory, no such prediction ever occurred. Like, not one prediction was the output of string theory to date that confirmed it in any way, shape, or form. This unified view is now confirmed by experiment that way. And basically what it says about the proton, though, which is remarkable, is that there is the same amount of information inside the volume of a proton in terms of Planck oscillators as there is outside that proton in the whole universe. That is, the information or the mass of the universe in terms of information is present inside 1 proton. How can that be true? Well, that can only be true if all particles are entangled. If all particles are entangled and all the information is instantaneous and shared, all volumes are together. And so now you can imagine each proton connected through wormholes to all these other protons in the universe. And these wormholes, they're micro wormholes that are at the Planck scale in the structure of space. And this might sound completely irrational and outside what's believed in the standard model, but as I mentioned, other physicists are coming to similar conclusions, that entanglement is the result of wormholes connecting particles. And that, so imagine a particle that falls into a black hole on one side, and the particle that's entangled within, when it falls into another black hole on the other side, well, now the black holes are entangled. And so you can imagine that everything is entangled that way. And the only reason we think that some particles are entangled and some particles are not is because when we measure a particle here, if it's entangled with another particle on the other side of the universe, we don't have access to it. So when we modify this one, we're not measuring any changes, right, on the other side of the universe of that particle pair that it's entangled with. But when we produce entanglement in a laboratory, which we do, and we measure, like if we change the polarization angle of one of the particles, the other one change instantaneously, no matter how far they are from each other. Even if the distance from each other is more than at the speed of light, the information could go to the other, it's still instantaneous. Well, when we do that in the laboratory, we have access to the 2 sides of the wormhole, which are the particles. But in all the other particles that we measure, we don't necessarily have access, or we don't necessarily know that it's entangled with the particle. It doesn't have to be on the other side of the universe. Could be entangled with the particle that's in the table in the laboratory. They're 2 rooms down from where you are. And you wouldn't know that when you're moving this one is changing its polarization angle, because you're not measuring it, right? So it's but what's remarkable in this this equation is that then the mass of the universe is involved in the calculation to figure out the mass of the proton and the mass and the radius of the proton. And it basically says that the information that's inside the volume is restricted by a surface, and that surface cannot let enough information escape for you to measure a larger mass. So what the information that's able to be transferred through the wormholes, because they can only connect to the surface, there's a limited amount of connection, that are Planck distance connection. So there's a limited amount of information that's being able to transfer, and that's what we call mass. And when you do that calculation, it comes out right. It doesn't just come out right, it comes out extremely right, extremely precisely right, and it's confirmed in laboratory. So what we're telling you is that you're connected to all of the information of the universe through the entangled world that you live in, and the complexity that you see in this world, which is extreme, which is remarkable. The complexity you see is the result of this information exchange, this entanglement, that the universe talking to itself. And you're part of it, and that's why you're talking to yourself. I don't know if you all do that. I do that myself. But but literally, this is how organization happen, and that is consciousness, right? The whole thing is talking, and so it's not like consciousness is this thing that just like appears out of nowhere. These are the mechanics of how. So if you're going to say consciousness is fundamental, you got to explain how. What are the mechanics that makes that true? And here you have that. And so that's really important because it actually makes it real.
Wow. That was a pretty powerful answer to the question about is consciousness primary? That was great.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, that there are some people on here that are saying, are you going to answer some questions? And I know William's been looking at some of the questions, so I wonder if you're open for him to throw a couple of questions your way between you guys.